Okay, so loss and grief. This is a really hard yet important topic. And it's personally important to both Haley and I as we've both faced loss and grief up close in our own stories. Haley with having two miscarriages in 2015, and for me, losing my former boyfriend to suicide in 2019. And so when we were kind of trying to think of episodes that were like a must have, we were both like, we should talk about grief because I think it's just something that, like I said, it's hard to talk about. And even being someone who has experienced grief and loss close up, it still sometimes makes me nervous and uncomfortable. So, do you feel like that too, Haley?
Oh yeah, it's really hard. I mean, it is very vulnerable. It makes you feel
Mhm.
like you're like putting yourself out there, and that's scary. And especially when it's something so personal to you.
Right. Yeah. And even I feel like whether it's my own grief, like whether it's sitting in my own grief, or even now sitting with someone else and their grief, it can be uncomfortable because
Hmm.
having a pain, whether it's your own pain or someone else's pain that you love, that like you literally can't fix. Like we can't
Hmm.
fix loss and death, and it's a part of life and something that we'll all face. And so for me, I I just like want everybody to always be like their happiest day ever. And
Hmm.
so it's very hard. And I think this is so common. It's very hard to see someone, whether it's someone you love dearly, like your partner, or even just like an acquaintance. It's hard to see someone so deep in grief and hurting and not, want to rush in
Hmm.
and fix it. Okay, so Haley, what like surprised you about your own grief and loss journey?
Yeah. I think what was most surprising is that I just didn't know, like, day to day how it would be or how I would
Mhm.
feel.
Mhm.
Like, you just kind of, I mean, I think generally I'm a pretty like happy person and on the bright side of things and very optimistic. And so to not always be like that was, I think, maybe not surprising, but it was hard. And I
Mhm.
would remember, like, having to go back to work after my second miscarriage. And I worked at Macy's, and it was in December. So it's like pretty hectic time.
Mhm.
And I was out on the floor with customers and stuff. And I remember, like, a customer would say something to me. I'd look at them and I would just like, my eyes would start watering. And I'm like, why am I
Yeah.
like wanting to cry right now? Like, it's just a customer asking me a question. Like, it actually got to the point where I had to ask my boss if I could just be off the floor for a little while. Cause like, it didn't matter who it was. If somebody came to say something to me, I couldn't talk.
Mhm. It is it is like very painful watching like other people's lives go on
Hmm.
in a normal way. Not that you would expect a stranger to know, but I agree with that so much. Even after like James was my former boyfriend's name, and after his funeral, I remember like people going to work on the following Monday and being like, my first reaction was like offended, like, why, what? Like, why are you going? This is crazy. Like, isn't your world
Right.
ending? And so, yeah, just like that is for sure a hard thing. And just normal conversations is
Hmm.
also very like, what? Like, why do you care about the weather? You know?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Ugh, um, okay, so what is something that really like helped or was comforting to you in your grief?
I think Russ was very supportive, but in a way that was like, he wasn't, like you mentioned, he wasn't trying to fix it because he knew that he couldn't do anything there was nothing to fix.
Mhm.
It couldn't be fixed. And
Mhm.
so it was more just like, he would just ask if there's anything that I needed for the day, or like if I just wanted to like lay in bed, like he would bring me food.
Mhm.
Like he just would let me do whatever it was that I needed to do. And so I think, yeah, having a supportive circle was really helpful. I mean, not just for us, friends and other things like that, but that's really helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
What
That
about for you?
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. Like having just people allowing you to like be where you are. I also think like people just doing things instead of like asking, because when you're in
Mm,
grief, like, what do you need? Even though that feels like a really helpful question, like, and I've said it before to people, like,
mhm,
I'll do anything. What do you need? When you're like deep in grief, you don't even know what you need. I mean, my
mhm,
answer, like in my head, was always like, the person that just like died, like
mhm,
that's all that I want. And so I think the people that were just like, I'm dropping off dinner, or, I'm going on a walk. Would you like to come? Like something very specific instead of
mhm,
broad. That really helped me because it didn't overwhelm me and that kind of thing. And then another thing that really helped was writing, which I know you also wrote a lot. Can you
mhm,
kind of talk about, how you wrote and
mhm.
how it was like therapeutic to you?
Yeah, so I would say before this, I would never really consider myself someone to like journal or write a lot. But there would just be times when I couldn't sleep and I would just get my phone and just start typing in the notes.
Mhm.
And like that was how I wrote most of the time, was just through like notes in
Mhm.
my phone. And I started Whimsy and Wellness actually a few months after my second miscarriage. And I decided that I wanted to share about my miscarriages because at that time I hadn't really known of anyone else that had gone through it or
Mhm.
like experienced it or really shared about it. And it felt like very alone. I felt very alone through this experience. And I thought, well, if I could share my experience and it could help even one person like feel a little bit less alone, then I would want to do that, even though it was very scary to like,
Mhm.
again, put yourself out there and share, be vulnerable. But so part of the writing that I did, when I couldn't sleep at night, I turned into like a caption that I posted on Instagram to share with others.
Mhm. Yeah, that I relate to that so much. And it is like vulnerable because I always worried I don't want people to think I'm like posting this for attention.
Mm,
It was more
mhm,
like number one, therapeutic for me to write out how I was feeling. And number two, just what you said, if this could help anyone, then it would be worth it. And I think the internet can be like this beautiful community. For me, I didn't know in my personal life anyone who had lost someone to suicide. And so it was hard to like kind of talk to other people about grief because their scope and experience was another kind of loss. And so I always just felt kind of misunderstood. And with the
mhm,
internet, I could find others who had lost a loved one to suicide. And in your case, like miscarriage. And
mhm,
whatever the case may be, whether however you've lost someone, I feel like the internet, we can connect with people who have lost someone in similar ways. And I don't know, I just felt like if other people's writing helped me feel even just understood or seen, then maybe mine would do the same. Yeah,
mhm.
it's definitely helpful for sure. So another question is, what is your take on, like, does grief ever go away?
I mean, I don't think it ever 100% is gone.
Mhm,
No, I think it's strongest when it's the newest.
mhm,
Like you feel it. For me, I should speak for myself. For me, I like felt it. I thought about it like every second
mhm,
after, right after it happened. And then maybe I thought about it like every minute, a couple weeks later. And then,
mhm,
you think about it a little less, I think, as time goes on for me, but it never 100% goes away.
Yeah, it's something you, like, carry. I Someone said this to me when I was, like, deep in grief, and it was really comforting to me, and I love analogies, they really help me, like, just process, and she had said that grief is like this backpack that somebody hands you that's, like, really, really heavy, and if you were on a walk or a hike or something and someone handed you this 50-pound backpack, at first you're like stumbling and all you can think about is how heavy this backpack is. And like you want to put
Mhm.
it down and that's all you can think about. But eventually you kind of like get it centered on your body and you get used to it and you can kind of think about other things, but you're still carrying it. And I just thought that that was like such a good analogy because it's true. Like at first, that's your world
Mhm.
is the loss and the grief. And for me, I was okay with that. It was not comforting to me when people would say, like, it won't always feel like this or it'll feel better with time. For me, that kind of scared me. Like, I didn't want the person I had lost to be this like distant memory, you know? And
Mhm.
so the thought of like, "Oh, it'll feel better with time," that actually, like, really stung, and I didn't want to think about that, like, I was like, "I don't wanna move away from it," you know?
Mhm.
But so, yeah, just, like, always carrying it, but that the weight kind of shifts and, you know,
Mhm.
is
I like that analogy too. I haven't heard that.
yeah. Okay, now I thought I heard this Brené Brown quote for the first time when it was actually just 1 or 2 weeks after my own loss, and it really like touched me. And so I wanted to read that because I think that it would be helpful for both grieving people and those of you who are supporting someone who's grieving. And so this is from Brene Brown. She said, "My mom taught us to never look away from people's pain. The lesson was simple. Don't look away. Don't look down. Don't pretend not to see hurt. Look people in the eye, even when their pain is overwhelming. And when you're in pain, find the people who can look you in the eye. We need to know we're not alone, especially when we're hurting." And I just thought, like, I have chills like reading that because twofold, there's so much to that that we can unpack, but, like, the first for me was, like, it was hard for me, the people who I would kind of run into them, and I would know that they knew, and they just couldn't look at me, they didn't they would either just say, like, "Hi," and I could just sense their uncomfortableness,
Mhm.
or even friends or family members who, like, didn't really reach out, and it was hurtful. And so when I saw this quote, it just made me so grateful for the people who kept looking me in the eye, who kept,
Mhm.
whether that was virtually like checking in or physically, like when they would see me, they'd say, like, "How are you doing?"
Mhm.
Can you kind of reflect on that quote for your own experience?
Yeah, I think so from my experience, not very many people knew what was happening with me at the time.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, Russ knew, of course, and some of our close friends and family members knew. And I would definitely say, yeah, that it was very helpful when they, like we mentioned before, that they would just like be there, even if they didn't say anything or do anything, but just saying, like, hey, I'm here for you. Even just like that, like just being seen
Hmm.
and just them acknowledging that they're thinking about me
Yeah.
was really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the other part of that quote that I love, that's like, "And when you're in pain, find the people who can look you in the eye." I
Mhm.
think that is just so good,
Mhm.
you know? Um, and you made a really interesting point about like people not knowing. I think, like I talked about a few minutes ago, all types of grief and loss are so different and complex. Like you can't compare like any grief really, which we'll talk about later, but I feel like the more I talk to grieving people and their own experience, like the more I'm like, "Oh wow, I never thought of that." But like how you said with miscarriage, like people who are grieving a loss of a miscarriage, like others might not know. Whereas
Mhm.
another type of loss, like it's pretty public, it's in the newspaper and there's services and that kind of thing. And so that like was something that I had never thought of. So I just kind of wanted
Mhm.
to call attention to that because there's always things about different types of loss, whether it's miscarriage or suicide or child loss or a parent loss that we just don't think of if we haven't lived it ourselves.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so now we're going to kind of talk to those of you who are grieving yourselves. And then afterwards, we'll talk to those of you who are wanting to support a grieving loved one in your life. So, for those of you who are grieving, I just feel like it's really important to say that this isn't like advice because there's no right or wrong way to grieve as long as you're being safe with yourself. There's no like, you're not doing it wrong. And so, and sometimes when people would tell me, like, oh, you should do this, I'm just like, no, I shouldn't.
Right.
um, so, like, I guess with all that Haylee and I share, what worked for us might not work for you. The thought of it might just flat out annoy you, and that's totally fine.
Mhm.
And there is just no comparison with grief. So, however you're
Mhm.
feeling about your loss, like, is your right and it's your grief and your experience. And no one gets to tell you that your experience is wrong or invalid. And so, even if it's you, like, you can, I guess, just to own that your experience is valid is so important. Um, so Haley and I came up with three main things that we wish we did or we wish we had kind of known in our own grief. And like I said, you can take it, leave it, laugh at
Mhm.
it, get mad at it, whatever. Everything
Mhm.
is valid. So, the first is that it's okay for you to voice your feelings or needs and to pause or step back from a relationship. This one was really hard for me because there were like some friends and family members in my life who loved me and wanted to support me, but were kind of saying some things or doing some things that just were frustrating and weren't helping. And I felt like I couldn't pull back from that relationship. Um, However, I could have, and I guess that's something that I wish I had more grace for myself to just kind of realize, they can have good intentions and they can mean well, and that's fine, but I have to take care of me. And them telling me, them saying, well, at least this, or telling me what I need to do just isn't helpful and it's actually hurting me, and so I have to take care of me and step back. And so whether that's with a relationship or maybe just like Haley said, she had to go to her boss and say, I can't, be on the floor working with customers right now. Just voicing our needs in grief, like be selfish, I
Mhm.
guess. That's the bottom line for sure. Do you want to share yours?
Yeah. So you mentioned like having grace for yourself, and that's definitely one of mine, like taking care of yourself, putting yourself first, which
Mhm.
I think I know for me personally, like I'm not usually very good at that. And then especially I think during grief, there's just so many things happening, and you don't want to like offend other people even when you're
Mm.
not feeling good at all. You still for some reason I still was like like the example that you gave, it's like you don't want to be rude or like you don't want to like cut
Mhm.
this relationship off, but really, if it's what's best for you at the time, then it's what's best. And it can be hard to know in the time. I think that's the other hard part. So doing your best at the time that you can of taking care of yourself and putting yourself first,
Mhm.
and like having grace, knowing like that if you need to stay in bed all day that day, like it's okay.
Yeah.
Like really thinking, what do I need to do for myself today? And just one
Yeah.
day at a time.
Mhm. And, like, that can be as simple as, like, have I had anything to drink today?
Mm-hmm.
Because like, when you're in grief, like, little things are big. Like,
Mm-hmm.
eating
Mm-hmm.
a meal seems
Mm-hmm.
impossible. And so even just asking, like, have I had anything to drink? I should probably drink some water. I should try to
Mm-hmm.
have some bites of some food, even little things like that. I also want to go back a little bit to taking a step back from a relationship, because something I didn't say was it's better to take a pause than to like forever hold resentment towards someone, because if they don't know that they're hurting you or not helping, there could just be more and more damage. And for me, I wanted to like be nice and all of that. I had all of my like excuses. However, like I was holding resentment and like getting internally very like mad at the person. And so it's just best to just know like I kind of need a break for this from this relationship, and just kind of accept that not everyone in our lives, even if they love us, are going to like know how to show up.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to choose me right now. So,
Mm-hmm.
and then the third one is something that I actually learned this, I think, from, I believe it was from the book It's Okay, You're Not Okay by Megan Devine, which we'll talk about later, but it was really helpful. Just that your grief means that you loved. Like, grief is the price we pay for loving. It's like the ultimate price we pay, and we all grieve. But I just think, I just always thought that that was like a really comforting kind of description. Like, the reason this hurts so bad is because I loved so much. And
Mm-hmm.
so you're not wrong or broken or overreacting for being so sad or so heartbroken over your loss. It means that like you loved so much, and it sucks to lose,
Mm-hmm.
to lose someone. Would you like to add anything?
No, I think that is very true. And it's
Mhm.
okay that it sucks. I mean, it's not okay
Yeah.
that it sucks, but
Yeah.
like, I guess just, yeah, the whole point of whatever you need to do to take care of yourself in the moment is
Mhm.
okay.
Mhm.
Because there's, like you said, there's no wrong way to
Yeah.
grieve.
Seriously. And just like I remember being proud of myself for like just getting out of bed. I'd be like, I did
Mm-hmm.
enough today. Like to-do lists and all of that kind of go out of the window. Like you're just surviving.
Mm-hmm.
um okay, so now we're going to kind of talk to those of you who are either supporting someone who's grieving, or maybe like other people's grief and loss makes you uncomfortable. That actually used to be the case for me. I never knew what to say or do around grieving people, and therefore I would feel so uncomfortable. Then when I was on the other end of it, I don't know, it kind of made me realize like, okay, wow, even though it's hard to be there for someone who's grieving, it's so important. And grieving people remember, just like in that quote from Brene Brown, like, we remember people who looked us in the eye. like whether that's through a text. I remember one friend would text me like almost every day saying, "How is today?" Because saying "How are you?" was such a loaded question. And I obviously wasn't good, but I felt like a negative Nancy for saying bad. Not that you can't say bad, because you absolutely can. You're facing a loss. But I always never knew how to respond to "How are you?" That's just so loaded when you're facing grief. And so that friend who would just say, "How are you today?" was like, okay, I can answer, "How am I today?" You know, I can say, like,
Mhm.
"I ate today. However, this happened," or, "Today's a hard day." Anyways, supporting someone, sitting with someone in grief is like, it's hard and it's uncomfortable, but like you're building trust, and I don't know, it's a really great thing to do, to look someone in
Mhm.
the eye in their grief. Um, okay, what's something that you have to share about, or have to share for people supporting someone in grief?
I was just gonna say to what you said before, I think supporting someone could even just be, like you said, as simple as sending a text.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I love that, "How are you today?" Or like, "How is today?"
Yeah.
Just I think that's like such a simple way to be there for someone. And I love that. So just wanted to say that.
Mhm.
Um, so I think like not trying to fix the situation, which we kind of touched on earlier, just
Mhm.
meeting the person where they're at. And like you said, like a simple text message, or just I'm bringing over dinner and I'm just, I'm leaving it at the door. Like I'm not even
Yeah.
gonna, I don't even need to come in. I don't know, maybe you're not in the mood to have company and that's fine, but I just want to make sure you eat.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, just like being there in whatever way it is that you can,
Yeah.
but not trying to fix it and not trying to hurry them along. Or like you mentioned, like the well, at least, or like, well, maybe you should do this. And it's like, well, just you don't have to do any of that. Like let that person lead that part of it and lead like when they're ready to do whatever it is, but just making sure that they know that you're there.
Yeah. And, like, it's hard knowing that you can't fix something. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that is uncomfortable, but I feel like if we can switch the thought process of, like, instead of, like, "This is so hard that I can't fix it," let it almost take the weight off of you, like, "I literally can't fix this." So, like, that
Mm-hmm.
takes any pressure off of me to feel like I have to, because I literally can't. There is no
Mm-hmm.
fixing death and loss, and it's just what happens. So if we can just be there, because oftentimes, like, trying to fix it just hurts really
Mm-hmm.
bad, because the grieving person knows you can't fix it. They're very aware. And as the grieving person, like, you don't expect anyone to. You know that no one has that kind of power. It's just like grief is lonely. It's like a really, really lonely and scary place to be in. And so, like, the comfort of your presence, like, as simple as it seems, you might not, because you're you, you might not know how powerful and comforting your presence is, whether that's over a text or sending a card or something like that. It's comforting
Mm-hmm.
for sure. Okay. The next one was to mirror their reality. This one was really helpful for me when a couple of people did it. And it's as simple as, like, when someone's, whether they're like talking to you about grief, like, I remember saying, like, "This just sucks so bad." And you would have people that says, like, "No, it doesn't," or, "Well, with time it'll get better," or,
Mm-hmm.
they would have some band-aid or fix it statement. But then there were people who would mirror my reality wherever I was at and say, like, "Yeah, it does."
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. Like, that's what I mean about, like, knowing you can't fix it. Like, just when they say, like, "This hurts so bad," it does. I know. I'm sorry. Like,
Mhm.
Just whatever they're feeling, whatever they're in, like, this is unfair. Yes, it is. You don't have to like, oh, but, like, don't feel that way because they do. Instead, just
Mhm.
like, because having someone mirror back to you, you don't feel the need to like explain your grief or justify it. Like
Mhm.
I was always left kind of feeling defensive when people would be like, oh, well, but it won't always feel that way or something. And like I said, when someone would say, like, it does suck, like I was just like, oh, thank you for
Right?
just, like
Acknowledging.
acknowledging. Yeah. Okay. And then what's your
Yeah.
third?
The third would be like, don't bright side things. So, and it kind of, these all connect together because when you're talking, it's true. It's like that person's also trying to be like, well, it's not that bad. And it's like, no, it is that bad. Like,
Mhm.
thanks for making me think that now I shouldn't be feeling like it's that bad when it is that
Yeah.
bad. But yeah, often I got, after I did share with them that I had a miscarriage, I would often get, well, at least you know that you can get pregnant, the bright side, and it's like, oh yeah, thanks. Like, that's totally what I'm thinking about right now. Like, yeah. Or the other one I would get that just would bother me so much is everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
Or along those lines, God
Mhm.
has a plan. It's
Yeah.
like, thank
Oh,
you, like, person that I barely
yes.
know that is like trying to make me feel better. You're trying to fix it. And like, I
Mhm.
get, like, again, your intentions are obviously to try to help me feel better, but it really did the opposite.
Yeah. I
Like, I
feel
would
like
so much rather them do what you said and just said, like, I'm so sorry. That must be really
mhm.
hard.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, because those bright side comments, like, that was, like, the quickest way to send me into rage.
Mhm,
Like, I would just be like, "Are you kidding me?" You know?
mhm,
And even, like, I can't imagine I was even that is even because it's like, we can't imagine someone else's grief. Even if it's a similar loss, like, each person and
mhm.
experience is different. And so, no matter what the case is, like, we really can't imagine because you're not them and you didn't lose the life that they lost. Um, so, bright siding is a big no no. And
Mhm,
if you're saying, like, well, my intentions are good, like, that's okay. We know that the intentions are good and that your heart is in a good space. Obviously, like, no one is going into that thinking, like, I'm gonna hurt them more and make them mad by saying,
right.
at least you can still get pregnant, or at least, like, they lived that long. But I just
Mhm,
think any statement with at least needs to go.
mhm,
um, and honestly, like, be awkward is like, it feels awkward, but it's better to be, like, awkward than trying to fix or anything like that. I feel like I told you guys I love analogies, and if you just picture someone, like, sitting on a bench in a rainstorm and they, like, can't get up, and you can't move them to get up, but, like, you can go sit with them and, like, hold an umbrella, but, like, you can't move them. So, like, just going and sitting in someone's grief and, like, this is happening, this is hard, but, like, I'm gonna sit here with you.
mhm,
And sometimes that's, like, in silence. And I also think, like, just flat out asking, do you want to talk about it? Because sometimes people do. And I think oftentimes, like, it's uncomfortable to ask someone. That is a very vulnerable question to ask someone, like, "Do you want to talk about it?" Because on the other end of that could be rejection, right? Like, they could say no, and then it's kind of awkward.
mhm,
But someone could be wanting to talk about it so desperately, and no one's asking,
mhm,
and, like, think about you could be that person who kind of, like, allows them to share about, whether it's maybe they want to talk about the loss, or maybe they just want to talk about like the life they lost. You know, I always kind of felt like I couldn't talk about like the happy memories that I had of James because I could kind of feel the other person's like uncomfortableness.
Mhm.
Even if I was just like telling a funny like past story, I could see that they were uncomfortable, and I would always think like, I just wish I could like talk about this, you know?
Mhm.
Okay. So, did you have anything else to add before we head on to the next part?
No, I think everything you said was right on. Yeah. I think the biggest takeaway if you're trying to support someone who's grieving is just to be with them where they are. Yeah, just acknowledging, just, "I'm so sorry. You're right." Like,
Yeah. Okay, so we normally end each episode with rapid fire questions, but that just kind of didn't feel right for this episode. So I thought instead we could just take some time and share some resources and tools that we found helpful and supportive, that you could either use yourself or pass on and that kind of thing. And these are just suggestions. It's not us saying, like, try this, it'll take away your pain, or this will definitely work for you. Because, like I said before, like what worked for Haley might have really annoyed me and vice versa. So just kind of take it for what it is. The first is the book, like I mentioned, It's Okay That You're Not Okay by Megan Devine. That is something that I just really recommend if you have experienced like an untimely or unexpected death. Whether, yeah, I guess untimely and unexpected just kind of encompasses it all. Um, and that's just her book is just incredible, and I reading it just felt like someone finally understood, even though her loss was so different from mine. I just was like, oh wow, she's not trying to bright side me or fix it or anything. Like, she's literally, the title says it all. It's okay that you're not okay. So I highly recommend that book. This one is one that kind of surprised me, and that's bereavement counseling. I think this is definitely like a personal choice because some people like really love and find support in counseling and some people don't. But for me, I was actually seeing a regular counselor at the time, and I just felt like I needed something a little bit more, someone who had a bit more experience with suicide. And I wasn't sure if I would find anyone, but it turned out that there was like a local bereavement center. Not local, it was like an hour away, but close enough for me to get to. And within that bereavement center, they had specialized counselors for all different types of losses. And so the counselor that I saw, like, she only did suicide loss counseling, and they had all different specific types of loss counselors. And then they also had support groups there. And so it might be worth, if you're kind of wanting to talk, especially to like a professional, um, maybe just Googling your area plus bereavement counseling or support groups and seeing if there's anything. Um, and there's probably also virtual bereavement counseling, and I know there's virtual support groups too, if you're wanting to just kind of lean on other people that might get it. And then essential oils really helped me, and I always feel like I always want to be like careful when I say this because I never want it to sound like oils fixed my grief,
mhm.
because they just didn't, but they were like a supportive tool that I would use. So the first one that I used was Trauma Life, and that is one that I would recommend, like if your loss was traumatic. for me, I would have flashbacks and just kind of not so great like visions. And so Trauma Life, I would diffuse at bedtime to kind of help me not go to that place. And then the next one, oh, sorry, Trauma Life is a Young Living blend, but it's a blend of Royal Hawaiian sandalwood, frankincense, valerian. I'll warn you, it does not smell good, at least to me. I did not like the smell of it, but it really, really, really supported me. Um, it has lavender, rose, all different stuff in it, but the valerian, I think, is what makes it kind of stinky, in my opinion. um, and then frankincense was very helpful to me. Tree oils are just very grounding in general. And so frankincense is extremely grounding. And I would just lather my chest and my feet in frankincense. Um, and I actually like remember at calling hours, someone hugged me and said, like, do you have an entire bottle of essential oil on? And I'm just like, yeah, I do. um, so frankincense is just such a good one. And then peace and calming was very helpful for me. If especially like I would kind of get so upset and worked up that I couldn't like calm myself down. And so I would just put a drop of peace and calming in my hands and like take some deep breaths. And it would really kind of help me to like get away from like the panic attack state. And I would diffuse it with Trauma Life to make Trauma Life not smell so stinky. And that was one you really liked too, right, Haley?
Mm-hmm. Peace and calming was very like comforting to me.
Yeah.
And it's a blend of blue tansy, orange, tangerine, patchouli, and ylang ylang.
Oh, it's so good.
And yeah, it's very, yeah, comforting is the best word that I could think of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want to share your oils just so we stay on, just so we don't bounce
On
back and
oils,
forth?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so after my first miscarriage, I actually ordered Young Living's The Feelings Kit, and it comes with six, I had to count them really quick, six oils in there. And it's supposed to be exactly what it's for feelings and like big feelings. And obviously that was happening with me after the miscarriage. And I got the kit and I opened them. So there's harmony, forgiveness, inner child, present time, release, and valor all come in there. They're all different blends, and we'll put exactly what's in each one in the show notes so you guys can see if you're not familiar with the blends. But I opened each bottle and they all smelled so terrible to me. And I think it's so weird because all of them are very floral. And normally I
Mhm.
like floral scents. So I didn't understand it, but I was like, wow, that's like kind of disappointing because they all smell terrible. And obviously I can't use these because they smell so bad.
Mm.
So I put them away for months actually. And I was going through my stuff a few months later and I found them and I was like, well, I should probably like give these to my friend or something so they can get used. And I pulled them back out and smelled them again, and they smelled so good.
It's
It
so
was the weirdest
crazy.
thing. I had never had that kind of experience with oils before where like they smelled so terrible that I literally couldn't use them to the point where they smelled like it was a complete 180 and they
Yeah.
smelled so good. I started using them and to this day they're still like some of my favorites that I use all the time. And I kind of with a couple of friends who used oils about that experience, and they said that sometimes the ones that smell the worst to you are actually the ones that your body like needs
Mhm.
at that time. So I probably should have used them even though they smelled terrible to me back then, but I couldn't. But now I use them all the time.
Yeah,
Like I
it's
literally wear them like as perfume, like I just, put them in rollers, roll them all over me, diffuse them all the time.
yeah, it's so interesting. But it makes sense because the the limbic system of the brain, which is where trauma and our memories are stored, is directly connected to like our sense of smell. And essential oils, when we smell them, they can get through the blood brain barrier and they go to the amygdala gland. And so that like emotional rejection to the smell, there's like science behind that, why you smell an oil that you need and it smells. That's probably why Trauma Life smelled so bad to me. It's just very, very interesting. Okay. Another tool that helped both Haley and I that we already talked about, so we won't go too deep into that, but that's writing. Whether it's in a note in your phone or get a journal. Also, Megan Devine, who is the author of It's Okay That You're Not Okay, she at one point she was doing them once a month. I'm not sure, you would have to kind of Google it, but she has a course that she teaches called Writing Your Grief. That was always something I was very intrigued by. I never took it, so I don't have a testimony, but I loved her book. And so if you are wanting to write and kind of process everything, that might be something to look into. And I guess, oh, and also there is an amazing TED Talk out there. You probably some of you have heard it because it was kind of viral, but it was Nora McNerney. I hope I'm saying her name right. She has a great TED Talk on grief, and I was really grateful someone sent it to me when I was grieving, and I was just like, wow, this is amazing. Like she explained grieving really perfectly, and she also like slid in some humor, and it was really good. And I think she has a book also and a podcast, and yeah, so there are tools and resources out there, but unfortunately just yeah, nothing can fix it or take it away, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I was gonna say, I, thought of another one that was helpful for me, and it's miscarriage specific, but it's a Instagram account called I Had a Miscarriage,
Mm,
and she talks a lot about what you had mentioned, how you can't compare your grief, and she specifically talks about it, like, within miscarriage, like, or pregnancy loss. You know, she's like, "It doesn't matter if you were 1 day pregnant or, 40 weeks pregnant," like, and with miscarriage, I think specifically people tend to, like, want to know that or ask that, like, "Well, how far along were" like,
yeah.
that makes a difference somehow in, like,
Mhm.
how you should be grieving. And I always thought
Yeah.
that, like, reading that was really helpful from her, and I mean, she shares a lot of, like, stories from just women all over the world, and again, it was just one of those things where it made me feel a little bit less alone to be able to, like, find that. It's like, "Oh, there are people that have experienced this, and they're talking about it," and so, like, I can, like, see myself, like, that I'm not the only one.
Yeah. That's so true. And I definitely want to encourage people that if you are feeling like misunderstood in your specific type of loss, um, whatever that may be, like for Haley, it was miscarriage, and for me, it was suicide loss. Whatever yours is, if you're feeling like no one in my personal life gets this, I would encourage you, and you want someone to get it, I would encourage you to just like even just search the hashtag on Instagram. That's how I found other, people who had lost someone to suicide, was I just searched like hashtag suicide loss, and I found, some other women, and I would just kind of read their stories. But whether it's through a support group that you can find or that kind of thing, just Googling or putting into Instagram your type of loss, um, you might, find someone or a page or an organization that you can connect with. Did you have anything else to add?
I just hope this is helpful for anyone,
Yes.
someone that's either, like you mentioned, either personally experiencing grief or, trying to help someone through it, or like you even mentioned, maybe it just makes you uncomfortable. I mean, it kinda makes everybody uncomfortable, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's like, "You know what I love talking about?
Yeah.
Grief." Like, it's my
Exactly.
favorite subject. I could just
Exactly.
ramble on. It's just
Mhm.
uncomfortable. I
Mhm.
think because in human nature, we do wanna fix it, and like you said, we don't wanna see people that we love suffering, and we wanna do everything we can to make it better, and with grief, it's literally not an option,
Mhm.
and that's really hard.
Yeah, it really is. Ugh. Ugh, grief. That should be the title of the episode. Ugh. But
Oh,
seriously, thank you so much for listening to this
yes.
episode. And like Kaylee said, we hope that it brought someone somewhere comfort and
Mhm,
just knowledge that you're not alone.
mhm.
So we'll talk to you next time.